Tom Harris is a good friend of the program. We bring him in all the time. Now, just before you start trying to get anything going here, let me just tell you, he is with a group called the International Climate Science Coalition. A lot of times after we speak with Tom Harris, people instantly call us and say, how can you possibly be a global warming denier? How can you No, that's not what this is about. And Tom is the first one to say that. Tom, am I right? You're not a global warming denier. You are a friend of science that wants all the science information out there.
Yes, that's right. And we're also a friend of the many people in the world that are affected by real climate change, natural climate change. You know, in the Arctic, for example, the Arctic permafrost is melting and buildings are falling down. In the Sahel in Africa, last year, the UN said 1 million children were at risk of starvation, partly due to climate change. So certainly we think that those people should be helped. The idea, though, that we are the master controllers of the universe and can stop it, that's, of course, the science fiction.
Okay, let's go back to why you and I are talking right now. I thought that this was kind of an interesting twist on a conversation that we usually have, which is trying to get kind of your views out there. But we keep getting... and I thought this was an interesting point, is you keep saying that mainstream media is not being clear enough about there being absolutely no link between extreme weather and climate change.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we approached the American Geophysical Union, who are having their massive annual meeting, thousands of people there. They're an enormous group from 144 countries, 62,000 members of people like astronomers and meteorologists and, people who study volcanoes and the ocean, things like that. And so we had to look at what kind of statements they were making, because they're very influential, of course, across the world. What kind of statements were they making on climate change? And here's their first statement, and we were very disappointed to see this. They said, and this was back in August of 2013, they said human-caused increases in greenhouse gases are responsible for most of the observed global warming over the last 140 years. That's paraphrasing the end of it because they go into more detail. But, that kind of statement actually violates their mandate, which is to portray accurate science to the public and into the media and decision makers. So we had to look further, and it turned out that when it came to extreme weather, they were much more vague. And that's really appropriate. It's a good thing to be vague when the science is vague. So we thought it would be important for them to reach out to the public and to say, look, with regards to extreme weather, like Hurricane Haiyan, the thing that, really walloped the Philippines, that the connection between that and climate change is really unknown and probably not very strong. And we thought they would perhaps be more receptive to that because even the UN's IPCC now are backing off on the claim that climate change is causing more extreme weather. And, even if the UN is saying that, their officials are not saying it, but the actual scientists within the UN's IPCC are now saying things like this. They have only low confidence that there'll be damaging increases in tropical cyclones due to global warming. So we felt, that's a pretty easy statement for them to make, and it can help to start bringing the whole argument back to ground instead of being this fanciful things like Al Gore says that, it's the greatest threat to humanity ever. But we were quite disappointed because when they answered us back, they just gave us a standard statement about human-caused increases in greenhouse gas are responsible for most of the observed warming. Well, I answered them. I said, yeah, well, I understand that's your statement, but that's not what our news release was about, and that's not what the interview that I'm having today with you was about, because I told them that I was being interviewed on your show. And so far they haven't answered, and that's very disappointing. So, the AGU, the American Geophysical Union, tens of thousands of scientists, they've got to start actually pushing science realism, because right now it's really stuck in a fairy tale.
We're speaking with Tom Harris. Tom Harris is with the International Climate Science Coalition. They are doing their best right now to make sure that their view is heard, that there needs to be a stronger, definitive passing along of information, I suppose, is the only way that I can say it, to make sure that science is clear in saying there is climate change and there is extreme weather, but there is not necessarily a direct correlation. Is this something that happened accidentally, or is this something that happened intentionally? Was this, in your mind, was this designed that people wanted to, that scientists wanted to scare people into seeing climate change affecting extreme weather?
Well, I think that the small group who actually assemble statements like the one from the AGU, there was only 14 scientists that actually got together and made that statement. It's interesting that one of them, publicly said the thing was nonsense. And, this is a real problem because there's many scientists within groups like the AGU who completely disagree. Here's a professor, Judith Curry, for example, from the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech University. She says here, what really irks me about the AGU statement is that I'm a member of AGU, and therefore this statement is implicitly coming from me. And of course, she thinks that it's ridiculous. She thinks the statement's completely wrong. So I asked the AGU in my last letter to them, I said, did you actually poll your members, the actual scientists within the AGU, and see if there was a majority of them who actually support the statement that's supposedly attributed to all of them? And they won't answer. And of course, the reason they won't answer, or they haven't answered yet, is because across the world, in all of these different scientific organizations, when they issue the statements, you have to ask them that question. Do the majority of your scientist members actually agree? And the answer is they don't know, because they never ask them. They just have a small group of executives and other leaders who assemble this politically correct statement that, in fact, many in the organizations, the scientists who work in the field, they actually disagree with it.
It's certainly an interesting debate. And I'm going to ask you a big question right at the end of the interview. Nice job, Al. But do you think that your view will ever become mainstream?
Yeah, I give it 5 years, and I think that what's going to happen is people are going to start noticing that winters across North America and Europe, for example, have been colder. Hundreds of people in Europe, North India, parts of South America, they've died in the last few years due to cooling, due to cold weather. And I think nature in that sense is really helping groups like ICSC. I don't like to see these very cold events happening. I'm looking at the Weather Network station for London. It certainly doesn't look like global warming right now.
That's right.
So I think 5 years and this thing will be considered a farce.
I tell you what, let's maybe not wait 5 years. Let's kind of check in with you from here and there and just make sure that we're on top of the conversation. How does that sound?
That's super.
All right. Thank you so much for this, Tom. Appreciate it.
Righto.
All right. Tom Harris, International Climate Science Coalition. This has been my stance on this whole thing the whole time, is I don't like science, which is supposedly the art of being very specific. I don't like that it all of a sudden is speaking in such vague generalities. Global warming is that. And I'm glad that they finally changed it to climate change. But when they start saying that our population is causing climate change, people doing this, and then when you ask for specifics, well, can you show the proof? It's kind of this namby-pamby, well, we show. There's no question that climate around the world is changing. There is something happening. But I think that to jump to conclusions this early to say, this is exactly what it is, I know this person is doing it, I know that there are not enough trees, when there is just as much science to counteract that, I get very nervous with kind of these general blanket statements of, just trust us. Well, I mean, that's just the way it is. And then for people to be attacked as global warming deniers and what, well, no, that's the beautiful thing about science is this seeking of perfection. The seeking of precision. And when you're dealing with such big issues that the world presents, we just don't know the answers yet. And that's why I think it's necessary that Tom Harris from the International Climate Science Coalition continues that conversation. Mike Stubbs will continue our conversation with what's coming up London in the afternoon from 4 to 6, and he'll do that next. London at Large, News Talk 1290 CJBK.